Hi everyone, this is Rizwan here from sustainablefactors.com. In this quick video, I'm going to talk about how organizations, especially financial institutions, are increasingly exposed to the risks of greenwashing. And I want to talk about what greenwashing is and how do organizations fall into that trap of having to greenwash their product shelf. Okay, so the first thing here I'm going to say is that there is not a single answer in terms of solving for greenwashing. We live in an era where there are insatiable appetites and there are no shortage of organizations willing to capture that demand. But I'm not going to really elaborate on the moral imperative here because, we don't really, organizations are not talking about that right now. Although it is pleasing to see these concepts start to emerge and surface in the regulatory consultations. So I guess I'm leaving it here as a placeholder for future conversations. And I guess eventually, I hope that there is a mechanism by which we can execute on managing these behaviors that are driving reasons for greenwashing. So all that said, the 2 points that I am particularly keen to highlight in this video is how organizations can be compliant, in other words, tick the box, but then still be exposed to greenwashing risks. And that's most organizations today, by the way. And then specifically focus on how ESG Sustainability Programme Management can be better integrated with your commercial proposition. So now, as we can see here, we have two large financial institutions, Company A and Company B, and they are both obliged to deliver against the mandatory regulations. So specifically, the key ones for us over the coming years in scope over the coming years are SFDR, SDR, and TCFD. Now, mandatory regulation forces an organization to pivot on their commercial proposition. And greenwashing risks begin to emerge when this commercial strategy is not aligned or not integrated into the regulatory programs. This lack of alignment is a consequence of where an ESG program isn't driven by or isn't anchored into a core set of program principles. So let's take a look here at Company A. You can see here that they do have a commercial strategy, this black line here. And as soon as ESG regulation starts to come into force, it begins to pivot that organization's commercial strategy. So you can see this black line starts to shift up a little bit. But we can see this particular business is not set up or enabled to pivot at the same rate as the regulation. Right, so it cannot effectively move in line with that regulation, and accordingly you have this high commercial impact over here. And what this means is that you end up having a big gap between what the regulations require and what you are actually set up to do. Right, now that's a big problem for you, and it's a massive gaping risk to your commercial proposition. In other words, it's a gaping greenwashing risk. So you have to then forget all these promises about sustainable outcomes that you're looking to deliver, because investors and stakeholders, they're eventually going to see straight through it. But okay, so even if you don't achieve these sustainable outcomes, your business now sits in what I call the shadow of compliance. You have a few choices now, right? So firstly, you can innovate rapidly to start closing this gap, and launch a commercially viable product that meets those sustainability prerequisites driven by the ESG regulation. Or you can shelve your product line and lose to the more agile competition out there. Or of course, the final option is that you can continue to sell your product shelf and just greenwash your offering. And that's when you get raided and get into the headlines. So now, why did this happen? And it's not least due to the fact that the ESG program was not tied into a core set of ESG program principles. But another thing is that this program was purely regulatory focused. There was no forums dedicated to integrating that commercial strategy. And for you to then have those forums enabled, you have to have a set of principles that the program's aligned to. Otherwise, it will just shoot straight past you and you'd forget to do it until eventually it's too late. And then Typically, these programs can be full of fluffy ad hoc meetings. They're talking shops. They don't really mean much. They're not driven by any sort of real rigid plans, and they start to lose their way, and you haven't really got anything to anchor back. You haven't got anything to anchor back to. And then you have these cost leaks, you generate low yielding benefits, and the risks go up. And eventually, of course, you get that compliance box ticked because you're solely focused on doing that. But then the compliance box gets ticked and you've got this huge commercial impact. And now you need to start innovating or, of course, end up greenwashing. Now, if we look at company B, and I can actually see one real emerging example of company B in those amongst those large financial institutions. There are one or two out there who are able to do this very, very well, who are doing this very well at the moment. And you can see, again, they have a commercial strategy. And again, as soon as the ESG regulation starts to impact their commercial proposition, they are able to pivot their operations and product lines, which then lead to genuinely sustainable outcomes. You see, because of this maturity in how this organization delivers their ESG programs, there is less of a need to shelf products or greenwash their commercial proposition. Or in other words, there is a low commercial impact. And why? Why is this? Well, again, the organization was delivering their programs whilst being rooted into a set of core principles. And again, you can read more about this on the insights section on sustainablefactors.com. But this particular organization, again, they had the set of core ESG principles, and accordingly, they were able to integrate their commercial impacts into the regulatory imperative. So they had this system in place where they were consistently monitoring their commercial proposition, the market demands for their commercial proposition, and how compliance was going to impact that. So they were very forward looking from that perspective. Their forums and committees were very well defined. They were not talking shops, and they had a very solid materiality agenda as well embedded in that. Accordingly, they get higher benefits, they have lower risks, and the internal yields are generally quite high relative to that ESG program. And of course, once again, the compliance box gets ticked, but you have a lower commercial impact and a higher result for sustainable outcomes. And again, I'll reiterate that there are many factors to greenwashing, but using a set of principles, ESG program management principles, enables your organization in such a way that the greenwashing risks are significantly reduced. So thank you very much for watching. If you learned something from this video, please do hit subscribe. If there is someone you want me to interview or any topics that you wish me to cover, don't hesitate to comment and I will attempt a video on it. And the other one, please do hit like if, of course, you've liked this video.